I am going to introduce our guests this evening. We have with us Alexi Marshall, whose work is on show at the Delaware Pavilion. Oh, thank you, Alexi, a little wave there, because we know that you're with Phoebe in your studio in London. Very exciting for you to join us from your studio space. So Alexi was born in London in 1995, but grew up in East Sussex and lived in Hastings as a teenager. And after returning to London aged 19, she then went on to graduate from the Slade School of Art in 2018. And her work investigates rebirth, spirituality, and womanhood, often investigating the sort of cyclical nature of life and death. She uses a range of media, but focuses primarily on lino-cut, print, mosaic, and textiles. Amongst other awards, including the Boas, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Alexi, the Boas Travel Scholarship and Anthony Dawson Print Prize. Alexi was selected as one of the Bloomberg New Contemporaries exhibiting at Liverpool John Moores University and the South London Gallery in 2018. In 2019, Alexi completed her first solo exhibition, The Redemption of Delilah, at the Public Gallery. And then more recently, she took part in a group exhibition, Dancing at the Edge of the World, in 2020, curated by Marcel Joseph at the Sara Zanin Gallery in Rome. So Alexi is joined by Canan Batur. And Canan is the curator of live programs at Nottingham Contemporary. Previously, she worked as assistant curator at the Delaware Pavilion. And here she developed numerous projects and exhibitions, including Alexi's exhibition, Cursebreakers. She's the co-founder of the Museum for the Displaced, MFD, and has written and developed projects at Platform Asia 2021, NTU CCA in Singapore in 2020, Raw Material Company, Dakar in 2019, and One-to-One in Basel 2019, and the Shanghai Biennial, the 12th Shanghai Biennial. She co-directed Clearview Limited in London from 2016 to 2018 and was a member of the 13th Baltic Triennial curatorial team. And she's currently working with Loading Art Space in Diyarbakir to provide consultation to artists based in and around the region. Have I pronounced that properly, Canan?
Kind of. Just to kind of like clarify, it's called Diyarbakir. It's the southeastern region in Turkey.
Diyarbakir. Thank you. I should have checked that with you before we came online. Our third guest this evening is Phoebe Cripps. And Phoebe is a writer and curator. She's associate curator at Flatland Projects in Hastings, Bexhill, and has recently been appointed curator at Goldsmiths Centre for Contemporary Art in London. In fact, I think today was your first day at work in the new role, yeah? So she was previously assistant curator at Hayward Gallery and assistant curator at the Delaware Pavilion. She has written for Frieze, Art Monthly, and TLS, Sleek, and Rhinestone. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to just hand over to you now, Alexi and Phoebe, from your studio in London.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
Thank you.
It's really exciting to be here. As Ashley mentioned, we're in Alexi's studio in North London. It's not actually much bigger than the Zoom backdrop shows, which I guess we'll talk about later on in talking about the process of Alexi's making her work for this show. These are sort of overview images of the exhibition, but we really wanted to start talking actually by first addressing this work, Ace of Pebble, because I think it's got such a specific and probably quite well-known story about Hastings, and one of Hastings' probably most famous former residents, Aleister Crowley. So do you want to say a little bit about this work?
Just before I start talking, I am losing my voice a little bit, so please forgive me if it cracks in the middle of a sentence. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you Ashley for that introduction. So this work, Ace of Pebble, it sort of directly responds to the title of the exhibition, Cursebreakers. The curse that Cursebreakers is referring to is a local legend that I found out about when I moved to Hastings, called Crowley's Curse. Aleister Crowley was this very famous occultist in the 20th century, and he died in Hastings. And it was said that he has put a curse on the town. And the curse is that you will never be able to leave the town unless you carry a stone with a hole through it, also known as a hagstone, or pebble, around in your pocket. I have heard different ways of breaking the curse since making this show, but that is the way that I was introduced to it. So the way to break the curse and be able is to carry this pebble with a hole through it. Did I say what the curse was?
Yeah, that you can never leave.
Yeah, the curse is that
Hastings.
if you're born in Hastings, you'll never be able to leave the town unless you have this pebble. So this piece is inspired by the aces in tarot, and the aces in tarot basically represent the raw energy of the suits. They're sort of like a seed of potential. So they give you an opportunity of what will you do with this opportunity. So I thought that was really appropriate for thinking about the curse. You have this key to breaking it, this pebble, and what will you do with it? So yeah, this one is the only embroidery piece in the show. It was actually one of the last pieces to be made as well. As you walk into the show, it's one of the first pieces you see, so it's referencing the title straight away, and yeah, giving you that opportunity, giving you that seed of potential as you walk around the show. You've got the seagulls at the top, again referencing the East Sussex coastline, which is really important to the show. Yeah.
The fact you can actually see that coastline from within the gallery,
exactly,
as well.
Yeah,
so you're sort of entering and leaving at the same time.
Yeah, I was also going to talk about the kind of like act of using it as an embroidery, right? Like, I mean, the intention of like this being the only piece that is somewhat embroidered in the space is somewhat highlighting the kind of like intention that you're trying to give within the space. So it's the first thing that we see when we enter. Almost, of course, like we are welcomed like with these, like by these big, massive triptych work. But when you're like actually turn left, that's the first thing that you see. It almost becomes this flag. So it gives this complete intention within the space, that this idea of like kind of why we're here to kind of like break this curse is very visible. And I just want to mention that very briefly.
It's actually the smallest work in the show, now that you've said that, but also probably one of the most important, I think. So yeah, that's something to be said.
It's interesting to know that you made it one of the last ones you made, because it feels like such an important, as you said, starting point and way of grounding the show. And I think it's quite literal curse that I think lots of people, at least who live around Hastings, are familiar with that curse. I, for one, the day I left, I went onto the beach and picked up a pebble with a hole in to make sure I could leave. And yeah, but I think then actually it's a really great entry point into the show, because the other works reference curses and mythology and folklore, but are much more, they're very layered, I think.
I think there's something really beautiful about just the pebble itself, like the fact that this hard rock has a hole that air can flow through, like you can move past structures, which is like part of what my thinking was around Cursebreakers, trying to break through like oppressive forces, break through old cycles, and yeah, being able to rebirth yourself from these things.
Do you think it makes sense to talk about Mother as well? Because that's also one of the works that kind of like we positioned. That's actually before, but it's not something that exactly is visible when you're like, when you enter the space, but it's something that you encounter with towards the end actually, and you realize these two entities kind of representing this idea of like rebirth and regeneration again.
Okay.
It's actually,
so yeah. These two mosaics also bookend the show. So the first piece you see is the borderline, which is the figure in blue, and the last piece you see is the Mad Mother, which is the figure in green. And I guess when you look at the borderline, there's this sort of solemnness, like people have told me, like they sort of deathly aspect to it, whereas the Mad Mother, obviously she's breastfeeding a fox. There's fertility themes going on there and birth themes. So you, as you enter the show, I mean, this was Canan's thinking as well. It goes sort of from death to life as you walk around.
And that's sort of the opposite way around as to how most, like starting with death and ending with life.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know that that's the sort of cycle of life does cycle through your work and a lot of the works in the show, but is there a particular resonance with beginning with death?
I think just a lot of my work always comes back to the same 3 sections or 3 themes, which is like life, death and rebirth. Like it always seems to come back to that idea. So it was important that we did it in this way, so that you end with life again.
But it's also about like creating this porous space, right? Like, I mean, it's also giving this opportunity to kind of like be reborn again within this space, when you're walking along. And also maybe we were just, I mean, as long as you feel comfortable with this, of course, but maybe because we always approach these works as these kind of like final outcomes, but we don't really exactly know the process in which you produce them. So maybe because it's something that actually a lot of people can feel, like a lot of people can feel its resonance within them as well. Maybe you can talk a bit about the kind of like experience of creating these works and why you end up using mosaics and why you felt mosaic was the right way for you to kind of like highlight these works or show these actually deities and saints.
Okay, well, mosaic is actually a really new way of working for me. I made my first mosaic at the beginning of 2020, and it was actually a response to where the Cursebreakers show was originally supposed to be held, which was in Flatland Projects. It's a artist-led space that Phoebe runs in Hastings. And it's situated in a building that used to be old Turkish baths, and they still have a lot of the exposed tiled columns in the space. And I was thinking about how I could respond to them, and it sort of coincided with a trip to Rome, going to the Vatican, seeing these mosaics, like beautiful mosaics in the Vatican, really inspired me to try and work in this way. It's like completely different to working how I work usually. Like the lino cuts start out as drawings, and they've got, so in my head, like I give them so many layers, so much narrative and symbolism, and lots of detail. And I found that using the mosaic was really freeing, because you sort of have to boil your idea down into a motif. You can't really go too detailed and subtle when you're working with bits of glass. You have to be quite intentional about what you want to show, otherwise the image isn't as strong. So yeah, I started working in Mosaic, and I really enjoyed it. You can't really see in these photographs, but there's a lot of subtlety in real life, because a lot of the glass is opalescent, and it's sort of, as you walk around the mosaic, the image shifts. You can kind of see it on Mad Mother, like half of her face is opalescent glass, and it looks really light green in this photo, but in real life it can go from light green to like dark shiny black. So yeah,
it's almost like one of those hologram cards you play with as a child, and it blends like a really lovely way of, you know, often with quite old paintings where you feel like their eyes are following you around the face, and she is kind of glinting and following you and shimmering as you move around her.
These two works were actually supposed to be, oh no, go ahead.
It's like a continue, please, sorry.
I was just going to say, these two work, my original idea was to have lots of embroidered tarot cards, and these two were going to be tarot cards as well, but I decided that actually the only tarot card that was really important to have was the Ace of Pebble, also due to time constraints. So yeah, these were originally going to be tarot cards, but I decided that these needed to be included as well, and made them into mosaics. So they're sort of these archetypes like that I've made myself, like an alternate figures for the tarot, the Mad Mother and the Borderline. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add a note saying that like a lot of your work, actually, even the liner cuts that we haven't actually mentioned yet, which you will see quite shortly, are also very three-dimensional in a way. So you do, every time when you look at it in a different light, you see different aspects of it, and you see the colors in a different way. So I really feel like this is something that's very much ingrained in your work and in practice. And also, I was just going to highlight the fact that when we were having discussions before, how this process was super meditative for you, and how you felt like it was something that that was almost like transcendental, you know, in the process of making. So I just want to kind of like add that at those notes as well.
Definitely. I think with making the liner cuts, it's very labor intensive. You're using your whole body to like, well, I am, because it's just me, and they're really big prints. But with the mosaics, yeah, it's a much more meditative process. You're sitting down, you're placing small bits of glass exactly where you want them to be. Yeah, there's a bit more control, I think, compared to making the lino prints. So yeah.
And I just want to also say, since we're a very small group of people, if you have any notes, if you have any feedbacks, if you have any comments, anything that you feel like that is relevant, please do go ahead and pose them to us. If you feel comfortable, you can open your camera and pose them yourself, or you can send your questions to Ashley and she can pose it to us. And maybe since we're talking about liner cuts now, maybe we can talk about the first triptych, Borderline.
Sure.
And because it does tell a story from beginning to end. And
yeah, so as you guys may have seen in the first picture, the main works that sort of impose you as you walk into the exhibition is this triptych of really big lino cuts. They're about 3 meters high. The piece of paper is 3 meters high and 2 meters wide, each one. And this is the first one. It's called Borderline Love. This is the first time that I've made a lino cut this big, and it's definitely the first time I've used so many colors. Yeah. Before, I've really just used one color for making big lino cuts. So it was a process of discovery for me as well, working with so much colour, which is why there's a lot of colour. I feel like as you go through as you look at each part of the triptych, I see myself, I kind of got a bit more of a grip on working with colour. But yeah, this is the first one. This is Borderline Love. It's made up of 5 panels that we actually put together during the install. So it's 5 separate pieces of paper glued together. It's this.
And that's partly the size of your studio,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. So I print them all in my studio. I don't have a printer. I just do it all by hand. I do it on the floor. On this behind me, I've got a whiteboard, so it's a flat surface. And yeah, I do it on the floor. I stamp on them to try and get the ink to go on the paper. And yes.
And how many, just before we get into the symbolism of them, like how many rounds of printing do you go through? This is probably my lack of understanding of lino prints from primary school, but do you like print them several times, adding new colors?
Exactly.
Layer by layer.
Exactly. So when you have more than one color in a lino cut print, it's called a reduction print. And essentially it's a really long process. Every color that you see, so you print each color separately, starting with the lightest color. So for example, in the main image in this one, I would have done the yellow first. And then I think I did the light green. And after it's quite hard to explain, but after you print a certain color, so after I printed the yellow, I would have cut out every bit of the image that I wanted to stay yellow. And then I would do the next darkest color and the next darkest color. And then you build up this image. And it takes quite a while because you need to wait a day or 2 days for each color to dry. So it's a long process. And if you go and see them in the space, you see that they're like quite sort of, they've got bits of dust and bits of linos attached to them still from the studio. They're not, I don't really see myself as a printmaker, even though I make prints, because I'm not organized and neat enough to be a printmaker. There's, as Ben, who also runs Flatland, described them, that there's lots of slippages there. There's lots of smudges, and like you can see that, you can really like see the hand in them. I think like you can see that they've been touched so much with my hands, and
sometimes a foot, right? Sometimes there's a footprint on the back.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it also gives like signal in terms of how much time you spend in each work and each. So with the colors that you count, you basically can understand how long it took Alexi to create that work, which is, I mean, I think quite a spectacular situation, right? Like, I mean, you kind of like get a glimpse of the kind of process that you have to go through just by counting the colors that exist within that work. Yeah, it's beautiful. Maybe we can talk about the symbolisms as well, and then the reason why you felt like it was important for you to start with this story in this triptych.
Sure. So this, I see them kind of like a narrative, kind of not. But this one, I guess, is about a relationship. It's about 2 people, a partnership. As we'll see through the other linos, it's like they each sort of have a different theme of the figures in the image. So this one is like about 2. It's about, as I said, about a relationship. The in the top right, is it right?
Yeah,
I guess I don't know if it's mirrored, but the green man, he's got, that's obviously a reference to, well, not obviously, that's a reference to the local folklore tradition in Hastings of Jack and the Green. It's a festival that's 1st of May, I believe, and it's an old pagan festival that is about welcoming in the summer. And the Jack and the Green Man is always depicted with leaves coming out of his orifices. And I quite like the idea of that. Again, it's coming back to like new life out of the old. I sort of think about the Green Man. He's welcoming in summer, so that's the new season, but there's also maybe like rot inside of him. That's why the leaves are like coming out. So something's dying for new life to begin. Yeah, what else? What other symbolism is in this one? The tattoo sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. No, I was just going to comment, like, because you were saying this like new cycle and highlighting that new cycle and the start of that new cycle is essentially a practice of like world making and myth making. So it's kind of like thinking about what previous mythologies and practices that exist and how we can kind of like give space to new ones and how we can kind of like create this almost non-linear time and just think about like, you know, what else might be out there just by kind of like referencing what we already had in a way. So I just want to kind of like point that out.
I think that's a really beautiful way of putting it. Well, you said that really well. Just another, I'm just looking at other little details that people might be interested in, like symbolism wise in this one. The blue girl with the raindrops, had the tattoo on her back is the 3 of Swords, which is another motif lifted from tarot. The 3 of Swords is about sort of heartbreak and melancholy and emotional pain. It's like the sad card, these 3 swords piercing a heart, and it's a motif that I use quite a lot. I like it. And also a really small one in the bottom panel, there's the little red dots that you can see are actually scarab beetles. Again, they turn poo into something good, like they use it for themselves. So that's another symbol of another like animal symbol of making something new from the old.
We just received a question from Cassus. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, I'm sorry about that. He's asking whether you think that there's
we've lost Canan for the moment. Cassius, is that all right if I read out that question? I'll just read that out while we'll try to bring Canan back into it. So yes, the question is, do you think there's an apocalyptic or dystopian imagery within your lino prints imagery and narrative?
Apocalyptic and what, sorry?
Dystopian.
Oh, dystopian. I think so. Maybe in this one, especially the sunsets. I wanted to use like it's sort of otherworldly, like all those like colors. It seems there's definitely like an ending happening here. Yeah, apocalyptic. I guess I haven't thought about it in an apocalyptic way, but that's really interesting. There's definitely something like ending in this piece. Yeah, that sunset feels quite, to me, like the dark orange always feels quite sort of otherworldly. Yeah, I already said that. Yeah.
And maybe, I'm just picking up on, that's okay, we got you back, Canan. We've read out Cassius's question. Thanks for coming back to us. I was just wondering if it's even maybe more personal than that, because you talk about, you know, you have mentioned a little bit about heartache or sorrow or something. So an ending which might be an ending of a more intimate kind of relationship than this sort of worldwide catastrophe, but a sort of more
Yeah.
internal sort of catastrophe or something?
I think there's definitely a mixture of that, because I do put there is a lot of personal stuff going on there, but I'm also talking in some of the other pieces that we haven't spoken about yet. There's a lot about our planet and the climate crisis and nature. So I think I like to sort of blend these things and maybe mask the personal things with these like myths and legends, and talking about stuff that's going on in my life, but make it liken it to these myths and stories, and make something new out of it, tell it a new story that more people can look at and, you know, have their own stories about what they're seeing.
I think it's definitely this sort of world building project, and there's a lot of sorrow and darkness that I see within it, but the fact that it ends with life and it always ends with rebirth is the sort of the necessity of like leaning in and going through that darkness and that sorrow in order to emerge as something renewed or something rebuilt, something more than what was there before. Like the sort of sprouting out of the nose of the leaves, and the sort of, it makes you think about the soil regenerating and always producing something new in the end that is just different to what was there before.
I think that also links back to the title of the show, Cursebreakers. Like for me, you know, personally, like I've had to lift myself up from rock bottom many times, and so I guess this idea of like rebirthing yourself, having to, it's all linked to real life and real life experiences, and trying to just constantly having to rebirth yourself, I guess, after darkness, which is just a thing in nature anyway, this life thing. So always
and also there wouldn't be that concept of darkness if there wasn't light, and vice versa. If there wouldn't be a concept of darkness if there was lightness, if there wasn't any darkness. So I think these are also quite complementary when we're thinking about like rebirth, regeneration. There wouldn't be birth if there wasn't any death, you know, like, I mean, so it somehow feels like this necessary binary positions. Sorry about that. I don't know if you covered. I have some problems with my Zoom, so it kicks me off for some reason from time to time whenever it likes it. So I'm back now. And we also received a question from Harry, sorry. And he's asking whether the middle image is a reference to Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. The snake definitely is linked to that for sure. Just kind of like, I knew that I was making an image of a couple, and to me, like, what's a more iconic couple than Adam and Eve, and having this like the snake is a motif that I always come back to, and I often put biblical references in the works, as we'll see in the last slide, in the third triptych. That's the second triptych. Don't know if we have time to talk. So yeah, the third one, this one, just talking about biblical references. This one is called Maggie, Mary and Lucy, and it's sort of inspired by the stories of these three saints: St. Margaret, Maggie, St. Lucia, Lucy, and St. Mary of Egypt. St. Lucy is the top blue figure. St. Mary of Egypt is the red one, and the main image is St. Margaret. And I'll just maybe talk a little bit about the story of St. Margaret first, since it's the main one. Her story, really briefly, is that she was swallowed whole by the devil in the form of a dragon. And she was her miracle is that she was able to burst through the belly of the dragon whole and unscathed because she was wearing a silver cross. And I really love this story. Like, it's quite fantastical, and again harks back to this being able to push through things, being able to she broke her own curse of being swallowed by wearing this silver cross. But actually on the image there, she's wearing a necklace, but it's actually a lotus instead of a cross, sort of referencing the image above her, which is the lotus coming out from mud. And also in the image, she hasn't been eaten by a dragon. She's sort of bursting out of this dragon corpse woman who looks the same. I mean, she has the same hair, so it's kind of like she's being bursting through an old version of herself. Is it herself, or is it a dragon lady? Who knows? And then you can see the dragon eating its tail, which is another motif I use a lot, framing the image. And this is a really old alchemical symbol about the continuous cycle of life. It's like the snake eating its tail, it goes on forever. It's called an Ouroboros. I think that's how you pronounce it. But you can see that in quite a few of my works as well, that symbol.
You sort of turned the whole show into an Ouroboros.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, by positioning those two mosaic figures at the beginning and the end.
Yeah, for sure. And the story, and then so I see her as this sort of like, she's bursting through, and the two saints at the top are, I kind of see them as like deities looking down. It's not the first time that I've tried to retell these stories of saints, female saints in my work. I grew up Catholic, being told these stories, and I've always been like loved fairies, myths, legends, which all this type of stuff, and I kind of see these like saint stories in a similar way, and I like to sort of retell them in my own way, or like give them a new image in my own way, like reviving these women that have been sort of stuck in the confines of history. So the blue one is Saint Lucia, who is the patron saint of vision and blindness. Her story is that I think her eyes were gouged out. So she's always pictured holding her eyes on a plate, usually. But I really like this image of like offering up the eyes. I kind of related it to being an artist in a way. It's sort of, when you're making a work, you're sort of offering up how you see the world through your own eyes and offering up your perspective. So Saint Lucia is giving this girl her eyes, I guess. And St. Mary of Egypt has a really strange story, but she was apparently a bit of a nymphomaniac and then got exiled to the desert and punished for her sex-loving ways. So I like to sort of reclaim her, and and her story is that she grew golden hair while being a hermit in the desert. So this version of her, she's got like little golden stubble in the lino cut print. And I kind of see these as like guardian angel deities helping this girl that's burst through the belly of the beast, sort of.
So we have one question from Billy Collins. He's asking, how conscious of an element is religion when producing the ideas for your work? Do you find inspiration directly from religious and occultist texts, or from the media and art interpretation of it as well? And on that note, I'm just looking at the time as well. Maybe it would be quite nice because this quite complements this question as well, if you talk about who do we tell when the bees are dead, because that's also a different reference, but it's a reference from a folk tradition. So I think that will also explain your question, Billy. So yeah.
I definitely get a lot of inspiration from occult traditions. It's something I've always been fascinated with, but also having my childhood, having grown up in a very religious family, it's yeah, I sort of blend the two and don't really put like I'm not religious myself now. I kind of see these stories in the same way, and I like to mix all these facets, like from occult traditions, from traditional religion, and blend them in a way. But yeah, I gain a lot of inspiration from the occult and folklore. Yeah, and I guess the media's representation of occult, I'm not really too sure about that one. I just know about it through my own research, and yeah, I'm not too sure about the media's representation of it.
I suppose it's the symbolism, like that interweaving of very different reference points and very different traditions comes through in your work, really through the symbolism and through, like, every small detail is there for a reason and is often lifted for you or represents something, you know, larger than a bee. Might not just be a bee, and is referencing then a particular
definitely
tradition or story or folklore. And I feel like what's amazing in your work is starting to understand where all of those come from, and then seeing how you do interweave these quite opposing views on the world, I suppose, sometimes.
But it's also, I think, it's just like letting it go, creating it and letting it go and leaving it up for interpretation to the audience itself. So you're not imposing a narrative per se, but it's about actually allowing the audience to see what they want to see from it. So for someone who's seeing this and not aware of this folk tradition, they might be seeing a complete different story, whilst actually, as someone like myself, who has been very involved in this exhibition from beginning to the end, I know the reference points, but I can still see different stories that lies underneath, you know? So I think that's, when it comes to answering that question, when it comes to like how media affects the creation of your work, I think there might be that as well, that you might not be able to see. But of course, that kind of influence is very subliminal and very kind of like unconscious.
Yeah.
And I think that's the amazing thing about symbolism, particularly, in that it's so personal, actually, and it's so personal for you, and not all of that's known. And then as you say, Canan, I attach my own personal readings onto it as well. This work, you mentioned before about how clearly, like, nature is very important in your work, and the environment particularly, and these life cycles, and I feel like this work is probably the one in the show that most directly addresses those themes.
Yeah, definitely. This work is called Who Do We Tell When the Bees Are Dead? And the title references an old English or European tradition that
also Turkish, I have to say.
Yeah, different things say different things, but yeah, Europe, I think it's European where the origin.
Yeah.
I can't really find a definitive origin for it, but anyway, the ritual that it's referring to is telling the bees, which was a ritual that people used to do who owned bees. Would be if an important life event happened in the family, like a marriage or more commonly a death, they would go and whisper the news to the bees, and the bees were sort of seen as this like these messengers sort of in between life and death, and they'd whisper the news to the bees before anything else, like the bees had to know. And I really liked this. I was thinking about it today, I can't actually remember how I learned about this, so I don't know.
You said you learned it as a child, right? Is that true?
No, I don't know. But I really liked this idea, and it reminded me of, I think this is what you mean, of this childhood memory I had of me and my best friend. We found a bee. I think we must have been about 5. We found a bee. She lived on a farm, a dead bee, and we decided to give it a funeral. We like made a little coffin and buried it, and I think we got a Bible out and read some stuff as we like gave this bee a funeral. And I was thinking about this sort of like complete reverence for nature that you have, and through this innocence, like as a child, you know, nothing is more important than something else in nature. And the first panel is me doing retelling this childhood memory, except instead of a little coffin, he's on a sort of Viking like funeral boat. There's a bee going along the river, and the river runs through the whole triptych. So yeah, it starts out in this sort of like luscious world, dogs, nice tree, willow leaves, clean river, and these 2 schoolgirls. And then the river passes through to the next, the middle panel, and the ritual is being carried out. There's a woman, she's crying, she's telling something to the bees, and again you can see on her like t-shirt there's the heart ace, 3 of swords, again that heartbreak symbol. They're standing in a really polluted river. The flowers that she's holding in her hand are dead, and her brain is I chose to have her brain exposed as well, because I sort of saw this woman as like the crone figure, like the wise, if you know, like the maiden, mother, crone trinity of like archetypes of women. The crone is like the wise older woman, and she's telling the bees that, you know, the planet is dying, because yeah, it is. And then the final panel is this sort of community, like utopian vision of this community of women like rebuilding, planting seeds, like putting fresh water, building a sort of hive hearth thing. And then there's a baby as well on top of one of the women, and the baby has a bee on its lip. And this is another folk tale I discovered about bees when I was doing this research, is that it was said that if a bee landed on a baby's lip, that the baby would grow up to be a prophet. So yeah, you can find a bee in each panel. There's the dead bee at the start, and then the young life of the humans, I guess, and then the swarm of bees in the middle, and then the final one, there's the baby human and the bee on the lip. So yeah, lots of bees. I was obviously thinking about the climate crisis as well. The bee is like a symbol. The bee colonies are dying, and it's like being used as a symbol for the ecological collapse that's happening at the moment. So yeah.
So beautiful.
So it's 8 p.m. now, and I think we can welcome a few more questions. since actually we're done with our time, if there are any, so please leave them on the chat, or if you want to kind of pose them yourselves, please go ahead and turn on your camera and ask them yourself. I think there was one question, I mean, because I was kicked off from Zoom. I remember one person was asking, I can't remember who, sorry, the size, the dimension of the mosaics. Maybe you can just talk about them very briefly.
Sure. The sizes of the mosaics. These ones.
Maybe so.
No, they're this size. They're kind of like A0 in paper terms. I don't really sure. Maybe like just under a meter high and about 60 centimeters wide. Yeah. And then where is it? Oh, that one. Oh, sorry.
The ones at the start.
The ones at the start. This one, the one with the black background, is called Green Man. That one's really big. That one's probably just under 2 meters high and 1.5 meters long, roughly. I can't remember the exact ones. Yeah, that was the first time I did like a massive jump. I'd only ever made quite small mosaics, and then I decided to make a really big one. And then that one's just a little, and then the one next to it, as above so below, is a little smaller. But yeah, that Green Man one took a while. It's really big. Yeah.
I think Esther wants to ask a question. Esther, I saw that you raised your hand. Am I correct in assuming that?
I was actually just saying that my question was about the size of the mosaics. So I was just saying, great, thanks for telling me.
Okay, great to know. I think we're done with our time. Phoebe and Alexi, if you don't really have anything to add.
Just to say thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Such a generous explanation of so much. I mean, I feel like we could talk about the works for weeks, because there's so much beautiful symbolism within them, but it's so generous to like hear more and to be able to, I feel like such a nerd for this stuff. Like, I just love to know like the history of where everything comes from and how that's personally interwoven within you as well, and it comes out so beautifully. So thank you.
So we just received one more question from Esther again. She's asking what's coming up next. So maybe you can just talk very briefly in terms of what's coming up for you in terms of practice or in terms of projects.
What's coming up next? A few group shows in London. There'll be one in November called Knocking It Out of the Park at Gallery 46 in Whitechapel, and then I'll be in another group show there at the same gallery next year. But yeah, that's it really. I've just been having a little bit of a break from the studio after this show, because for the past 1.5 years I basically lived in this little shed, very late nights, no social life, but it was all worth it. So yeah.
It absolutely was worth it. Thank you so much, Alexi, and thank you, Phoebe and Canan, for joining us again. It's very nice to see you as my old former colleagues.
Thank you so much, Alexi. It's been such a pleasure to work with you over the last 1.5 years, and you've been so generous with everything. So thank you so much, really.